We've covered the single point urban interchange before on the channel. In fact, it was one of the very first videos we covered for City Skylines 2. But what if we split it over 2 levels? Well, that's exactly what we're going to cover today. The design we're going to create is a variation of the urban windmill we had on the channel a couple of weeks ago. I guess this would be something I'd use in an even busier arterial road junction, but perhaps in a spot where you don't have the traffic or the space to justify a full flow traffic solution. This will feature a similar compact ramp configuration as the urban diamond, but the difference here is that the ramps will cross over slightly where it meets the crossroad and joins the other ramp at a single point. One point at each level will give us the dual point as indicated in its eponymous naming. One thing that is necessary for this build is mods. I couldn't do it without Anarchy. I'm sure one of you Skyline demons could do it, but it was a no-go for me. I reckon for it to work on vanilla, you'd need to offset the roads kinda like an echelon interchange. It'd probably look weird, but I reckon that's how it would need to be done. I don't know, I might come back and give it a go when I have the time and add it to the vanilla interchange playlist. I will talk about traffic lights for this build later, as depending on when you're watching this video, there might be some other feasible configurations for it. For this build, I've hooked up all the traffic spawners on the interchange test map, so we're going to be pushing a fair amount of traffic through this one today. So let's get on with the build. So a basic bridge here to kick things off. I'm going to build it 2 squares off the lower road at the height of 8.75 meters. To bring it down to ground level, I'm going to shoot for a 5-degree angle. Same again on the other side. And I don't know why it's done that, let's quickly redo it. Now, rather than giving exact measurements here, I'm going to use the grid squares as guidelines. There will be a bit of freehanding stuff here, so using the grid is ideal. I'm going to use this square to run our first ramp off. That's 2 down and 2 across. And I'm going to use this square, 2 down, 2 across, to start our curve. Turning the snapping off, I'm going to pull it over, roughly centre under the bridge. If you're building along, don't stress out the exact placement too much here. I'm going to flip over and use the same markers on the other side now. Once we've created the curve here, we'll need to zoom in and we need to make sure that the 2 lanes have a bit of a gap between them, otherwise this interchange isn't going to work. If they're too close, the traffic will collide, they won't move at the same time, and we want to avoid that. You can see here where the traffic's likely to go. These 2 worn asphalt lines is basically what you're looking for. Make sure there's enough distance. For the next 2 ramps, I'm going to do a quick marker first. So from the top section, I want to find the distance that's roughly the 5-degree ramp that I'm going to be looking for. So pulling it out, I can see what square here on the grid a 5-degree angle would start. And I'm going to pull a marker road out just at a 90-degree angle. That's going to give us our starting point. I'm going to use the same sort of angle for the curve in as we did earlier on. So 2 squares down, 2 squares across, where we start the curve from the crossroad. You can use a different grid square if you want. Just pick the same ones on each side if you want a consistent aesthetic. As you're bringing the ramp up to the higher single point, the game will try and form a roundabout under the bridge. It can be a little bit fiddly sometimes, but you just need to find the point where you can complete without warping the bridge and without making a roundabout. And this is basically the reason why you need Anarchy for this build. If you do make a roundabout by accident, it's game over. You'll need to rebuild it, or you go back to a previous save. You all save regularly when you're doing your builds, don't you? Don't you? I'm going to do this again at the other side, and this one's going in a little bit easier, so we'll get it in nice and smooth. Okay, lovely stuff, and that's really the tricky bit out of the way. For the addition of the right turn ramps, you can use whatever measurements you want. For these ones, I'm going to simple curve them in, and I'm going to use roughly 70 meters or so for the measurements of the curves. So 70 meters out, 70 meters across. Those upper ramps were a bit janky for those measurements, so I'm going to redraw them in a bit smaller and we'll see how we get on. As you can see, I'm not too worried about a couple of meters here and there. It'll look pretty consistent as long as you're close enough in the measurements on both sides. To connect the on-ramps, I'm just going to use the grid again and bring the roads in exactly the same on each side. And that's looking pretty nice now. So there's a few things to do to keep this thing running. I'm going to apply the 7-lane asymmetric road, and that'll give some dedicated turning lanes for the ramps. We'll do this on each side and we'll straighten it up as it's required. We'll also apply the same road, so the 7-lane asymmetric, after the right turning traffic meets its crossroad. This is basically given a dedicated turning lane as well. It's important to restrict the U-turn if it creates one by not allowing the left turns. This will force all the traffic straight ahead, and it gives us our dedicated lane we need instead of this U-turn lane in the middle. And this is the same idea as what we did in the urban windmill a couple of weeks ago. You'll want to get rid of all the walkways and the traffic lights. If you're not happy with the placement of the pillars, just remove them with a better bulldozer mod. Easy. Now at this point, if you're happy with it, that's the main part of the build done. This section that I'm going to show you just now is completely optional. For purely aesthetic reasons, I decided to redraw the ramps. I reckoned I could get them in a bit smoother. We know all the connection points work. We've already got our additional lanes in place, so it's just a case of deleting and recreating the curves if you want to. If you're happy enough with the way it is and you're building along, that's absolutely fine. To get a consistent curve each time, I'm picking roughly the halfway point between the beginning and the end of the curve, and we're going to use a consistent distance from the road from which we're building off. So I'm going to take about 5 squares or so away from that road. When the main ramp is in and adjoined into its single point, the left turn lanes are put back in exactly the same way as we've shown previously. Once we have the traffic lights and the walkways sorted and the pillars removed, I think it's looking way better. Now that is just about acceptable. If that bugs you, you rebuild it, but I'm going to run with it. Now here's the before and after. Which one do you prefer? I'm happy with the build now, so it's time to make it look a bit nicer, and we'll give it some context and a bit of a backdrop. So job 1 is to apply some key walls, and that'll help us get rid of that yellow ground effect with the flattened terrain tool. It'll look much cleaner. To apply this modded surface, I'm going to use the new area bucket tool by Piccana, I think that's the pronunciation. What an absolute treat it is too. Models are killing it right now, and how quick and easy is that? Superb, superb. I'm going to stick a few bushes down here, and then we'll build up a quick pseudo city. So let's grid it, zone it, and with unlimited demand on, let's build it. Here we go. And I forgot to load the mod. I'll be right back. Oh, here we go. So I think that's come out looking pretty good. Now I did want to come back and talk about the traffic lights. In short, just don't use them as things stand. The game will give you a 3-phase sequence on each of these points. Each oncoming ramp is given its own phase, which is a shame because it's not necessary. The traffic doesn't conflict, coming off the ramps. However, if you happen to be watching this later down the line and you have access to a full traffic light mod, then I reckon a fine option would be to give the cross traffic one phase, so you can get both of the ramps coming on at the same time, and then a separate phase for the cross traffic. So that's the traffic going across the bridge, for example. So a 2-phase total, and I reckon that would work really, really nice here. Sadly, we don't have the option as things stand. So this interchange, it ain't perfect. There's still despawning here and there, and that's to be expected as it's high traffic with conflict points, but I think it can fit a need. And as I said at the start, this could be a cool choice for an overworked arterial junction. It doesn't take up a huge amount of space, and it will shift considerably more traffic than maybe some of the other common options that you might consider. I think from an aesthetic point of view, it looks really elegant, especially if you redraw the curves in even smoother. It's a worthwhile adjustment if you ask me. As always, thank you so much to my Patreon, my YouTube members, and all of you guys for watching it. I hope you've enjoyed this one, folks. Here's a couple more for you. Cheers.